And we're working with Mariano Heyden from Erasmus University and Pavlos Symeou from University of Cyprus. The main idea of this paper is we're trying to understand what is the role of diversity in the management of the firm, the top management of the firm, in dealing with a particular issue of business, of CSR basically, and that is corporate philanthropy. Now at this stage, which the paper will appear at some point, I hope, we are trying to see whether the board of directors, the gender of the board of director members and their minority status has an impact on philanthropy. And gender is particularly appropriate today because it's apparently Women's Day, International Women's Day, as I was told off for not knowing. Anyway, so what we're doing here is we're looking at corporate philanthropy, and we understand corporate philanthropy in the way that Wang and Choi and Lee in 2008 talk about it, as gifts given by corporations to social and charitable causes. And a question, basically a very basic question about the nature of business is, given that business are supposed to be very selfish and very profit-oriented and and we call all that economic rationality, why would they give any kind of any philanthropy to anybody? And anyway, we are not going to answer this question, but we're going to ask a sort of a related question, one of the smaller questions that are more answerable. This is more esoteric. But we're trying to see how demographic diversity affects economic philanthropy here. Now, what we're doing is trying to move this slide along. Okay, thank you. We're looking at this from two perspectives. One is agency theory. According to agency theory, the board of directors act as a mechanism to create long-term value for the firm's shareholders. And the main purpose of the directors is to monitor and control the executives so they can basically make sure that the state shareholders' interests are supported or are dealt with, and the managers do not run away with the money and run style. Another approach is that we look at it from a CSR perspective, and we can see philanthropy from a CSR perspective as the board of directors in this case would be more involved in the strategy making by contributing the knowledge and resources and basically looking at the longer term again of the corporation, because CSR quite often helps the corporation over the longer term because of the impact that it has on the community. So we're basically looking at this we're drawing on these two kind of theories, or these two perspectives to create some, wow, it worked. No, it isn't, but she did it at the same moment, so it was very good. This works, yeah. So that's teamwork. Yeah, I press the button, she sees me, and she does that. It's very well done. So what do we mean by diversity? Well, diversity, basically, we mean the distribution of difference among the members of team with respect to a common attribute. Now, we can think of tons of attributes here that we can talk about diversity. It's interesting, what do we mean? What we're looking at here, we're mostly looking at demographic diversity, and we're trying to understand basically diversity in boards can be a source of creative thinking because different people bring different ideas, different people with different backgrounds, different characteristics can be a source of different ideas. They can also be more responsible citizens because they sort of reflecting the demographic composition of the community in which they operate. They understand more what's going on. They identify with the people there. If you want to sell if you want to sell a pair of sneakers to a 15-year-old, your best marketing researcher is a 15-year-old. If we try to do that, I mean, it won't work. We don't know. What do we know about what do 15-year-olds do with their sneakers, you know? The role of minority representation has been the subject of substantive debate in the literature. And here we're looking at two kinds of things. We're looking at... You jinxed us. You jinxed us. Okay. We're basically saying that there can be two kinds of arguments that can be made here about the two things that we're looking here, which is female representation of the board of directors and the minority status. We can say that female directors, there is some evidence in a 2011 study that tend to have different educational and professional backgrounds from their male colleagues, female directors that is. They tend to be coming more from non-profit background, and therefore one argument could be made that they would be more socially responsive. They would be more They would see more things and be willing to argue for a philanthropy in an organization. Of course, counter-arguments can be made. We can say that, for example, if we have minorities, or they might have, or even women, if there are minorities in the board of directors, might have a sort of a problem in getting their voices across, or the ones who really made it through are so institutionalized, or what would be the word, so socialized in the norms that they are more, it's like saying England had a woman prime minister. Yeah, it doesn't make a difference. They had Thatcher. Come on. Anyway, so let's move on to the next slide. Ethnic diversity could be also another thing, because it represents different kind of social system, different groups affiliations, and could have again a positive association. And we could also have again positive associations because they are looking from different communities in which they operate. They can see from where they came from. They can represent a more plurality of perspectives, but also again they might be socialized to unconsciously adopt the ideas of majority, especially if they want to make it to the board, so that might not be an issue again. And again, similarity attraction mechanism may cause the team to be more homogeneous in task-related decisions than overlapping worldviews. So you might have people that are ethnically diverse, but they're more, I think the term is Catholic than the Pope. Right. These are the hypotheses that we are looking at the moment, and I would really appreciate at the end of this presentation if you can give us any kind of feedback or any kind of suggestions about how we could develop this paper further, because we've reached a certain level and we want to develop it a little further for a journal at some point. So any recommendations would be very, very welcomed. And if you think something wrong, we might as well hear it from you than from the reviewer. That's always better. So we have 4 hypotheses here. One is that board gender diversity would be positively related to the likelihood of firms' involvement in corporate philanthropy. We have the other side of the coin here, that gender diversity will not be related, will be negatively related, in other words. And this could be the point which we don't have a lot of arguments here for this at the moment, but the main issue could be that diversity, any kind of diversity, could bring some kind of conflict in the board, and therefore might lead to some kind of indecision, alienation of certain initiatives, and so on. Finally, we do the same thing with board ethnic diversity, and again, positive and negative. And now I will turn over the presentation to my colleague to tell you about the methods. I'll press the button now.
Okay, so because I speak slowly, I got my slide, my own slide. So to take this hypothesis, we took a longitudinal approach. So we worked on a sample composed of 567 companies on the S&P 500 list, which appeared continuously between 1919 and 2000. So more or less 3,400 data points. We gather our data from 3 data sets. For the corporate philanthropy, the data come from KLD. The demographics of the board of director member come from risk metrics, and the financial and firm data come from CompuStat. So our dependent variable is the corporate philanthropy, and it's measured by the community strengths, KLD dimension. So it's one specific dimension in the KLD dataset. It's made by summing up different items related to education, charitable activities, and so on. So we recoded this variable because it's not so continuous. So it's 0 if you have no expenses at all in corporate philanthropy, 1 if you have at least 1 item, and 2 if you have at least 2 or more items related to corporate philanthropy. For independent variables, so it's the board of director demographics. We measure the gender diversity by the relative number of women on the board. The ethnic diversity by the below indexed calculated on the ethnic minority members. So it's a specific formula to get like a score of diversity. And there is a mistake in the presentation, so the relative number of insiders is actually controlled, so it's not in the independent variables. And for the controls variable, in line with similar studies, we include its financial performance measured by the return on equity, market performance measured by Tobin skew index, the firm side measured by log of assets, board size, and industry affiliation, and so the relative number of insiders. To do that, we, as our dependent variable is an order categorical variable, we use the general order probit model on panel data.
That's me.
Yeah, that's.
Thank you. Okay. What we did is we basically, these are the results of our findings. I know it's just a bunch of numbers, so I'll point you to the right number. Firm size, financial performance, market board size, percentage of female directors, we see that they were significant and increasing in significance as we move from one strength to the second level. So as we increased, decreased, sorry, we went for 2 asterisks 1. And board ethnicity, again, we have a significant diversity here. We don't have a strength to board affiliation. We didn't really look at this right now because it's another variable that we will include in a further hypothesis, just that we haven't done that yet. So these two, what we're finding basically is that in both cases, diversity does have a positive impact on corporate philanthropy. The only difference that we find here is that board ethnicity has a positive effect up to a certain point, but beyond that doesn't make a lot of difference. And another additional findings that we did is that larger firms are more involved in corporate philanthropy. Maybe speculating from some other work that their visibility is makes them more sensitive to crisis, and that's why they want to build a good model, a good philanthropy, a good sort of what Godfrey calls moral capital, so that they can insure this, so they can make an insurance for the future crisis or future negative effects that they will have. So basically, board gender diversity is positively related to the involvement of corporate philanthropy, and ethnic diversity is positively related with the firm's involvement in corporate philanthropy. That's the two findings that we have here. Basically, we indicate a positive impact on corporate philanthropy of a diversity in boards. Probably seems that it outweighs the potential negative effects. Gender diversity appears to be more a predictor, more a consistent predictor of likelihood of corporate philanthropy. And of course, there are many limitations here, because we could talk about that. The diversity may lead to innovative and affectionate board functioning, and it helps firms to dissolve those philanthropic activities that balance social and economic benefits. Another thing that we want to look at some point here that we haven't really done, but we're thinking of as an implication for the future, is try to see if there is any synergy between the the diversity of the board and the diversity of the top management team, because one could really make a difference. The problem is we haven't been able to find top management team diversity data yet, unless somebody's willing to sit down and do annual reports, which we haven't found anybody willing yet. Anyway, that's the key problem. But we're interested in this too, because an argument could be made, a very interesting, I think, argument could be made, that if you have both, you would have a much of a positive effect, because either one of the two can kill a philanthropic initiative. Either the top management team doesn't propose, or the board of directors says no. But if they both agree, so maybe diversity in both would have a positive effect. That's the last slide. Okay. Yeah. So I think we saved some time for due to technical difficulties for a third presenter, which means we have about 10 minutes now for questions. So we're open to questions. Please give me the easy questions. Give her the hard ones.
Well, I have two and to choose.
Okay, go ahead.
The first is, these are bundled actually. I'm just thinking about the causality in here, and this is somehow this is tacitly in the second bullet point in implications. Is it possible that the same firms that are involved in philanthropy would also be sensitive to diversity, minority, and so on and so forth.
That is something that I do think we have to look into more depth, because I mean at the moment I think the way we're having it here is we are lagging, right?
Yeah.
We have a lag of diversity, then philanthropy. So we have 1 year lag, right?
Yeah.
So we have 1 year lag, but maybe that year lag is not enough.
Since you have, that was going to be my second point. Since you have a longitudinal data set, it would be theoretically nice to have a baseline, before and after. Before they diversified their boards, before they, and what happened after they brought in a number
yes,
of...
that would be, right, that's a good point, because we could lag, and we could increase the second lag or the third lag, but if the diversity hasn't changed, it doesn't really matter anything. We need to do that cutting off point. It's a very good point, because it would establish the causality. Because it is easy to make it is an easy argument to make that, not an easy argument, an obvious argument to make that it's kind of firms. This kind of firm does those things, and it does A, does B, but it's not A that causes B. You're absolutely right. Thank you.
I jump into the causality issue that Hamid mentions. Here in France, we have perhaps a life experiment that I don't know exactly how the law goes, but many large firms are obliged by law to put more women in their boards. So the point is, perhaps it would be nice to see, perhaps in 2 years, what happens. So if philanthropy increases, or perhaps just the company tick the box and we go on, it would be nice to see what goes on.
We could, that would be good. If we could find data in France, that would be great to be able to do that, and maybe because one of the problems we've had was, yes.
In just a minute, can you tell me more about the KLD index and what exactly, is it an open index? How does it work?
KLD index or KLD data? KLD data set?
It's a Kinder-Linderberg or Domini research index, and it was recently bought by another company whose name I don't remember.
Okay.
But if you want, I'll send you the link.
Okay.
And basically they start measuring from 1990 what? 91? Anyway, the data set exists from 92 or 91 or something until 2011 basically. And they measure along 13 dimensions. They measure 13 aspects of corporate social responsibility of firms. Like, for example, this philanthropy is under the community. Then they have environment, then they have products, then they have employee relations, and so on and so on. All kinds of things. And they measure two aspects of that. They measure positive and negative. And they have different screens. So they have, 5 positive screens, 1, 0, 1, 0. And 5 negative screens or 4 negative screens, but they're not collinear. You cannot add them up. It used to be like 97. Wadok did a study with them, and they added them all up and said this is the net score, but it's not, because they're not collinear. It doesn't mean that they have one strength here, one weakness here. They cancel each other out. They don't. They're completely different aspects. So, yes.
How do you avoid, or if not avoid, how do you deal with the essentialism issues attached with such categories as gender, as ethnicity, or diversity itself?
What do you mean by essentialism?
If I'm an Afro-American member of a board,
yes,
I can be more sensitive to some issues, not because I'm an Afro-American culture or Afro-American DNA, but because I'm just, as a citizen, involved in this or these activities. It's not a question of being Afro-American or not. And the same as for a woman or for...
We can't.
How do you deal with this?
We don't measure it, we can't do it. So that's one of the limitations.
It's a big limitation.
Unfortunately, yeah, it is. That's the problem that we have when we do this kind of studies where you're trying to get cross-sectional or longitudinal data. But you see what you measure. We can't measure, you can't see.
Women or black people or something like that.
So what happens if you have an ethnic minority and it's a woman who's in an ethnic minority? Do we count for that? I don't think we do.
I have 2 more questions about one about the who and the other about the what. The who, by the who I mean who is the CEO, who is the number one. and the company. My superficial understanding of this, not doing any research on this, a lot of the philanthropy or philanthropic efforts tend to be personalized or associated with the number one in the organization.
The CEO.
For good or wrong, that's just my perception. So, do you control? Do you have any way to control for this?
No, because then we have to start looking in the top management team, and we haven't been able to do that. But you're absolutely right. We have to look at top management team characteristics, but I'm not so sure. Again, that answers your question about how to control for the individual person.
If you have Bill Gates, no matter how
Yes.
how many women or minorities he would have in the world, that's Bill Gates, right? So we have to somehow try to get that
But
out of the picture.
we assume that if you have like 500 or 1,000 firms or whatever we had here, 507. I mean, that will mean a few outliers who we either catch them because we do outliers or we
this
don't.
is just
So
an
it's
objection
not-
that the reviewer would have. The reviewer would say,
Yeah.
okay, do you control for this
for-
the number one effect? The second thing would be a suggestion. It's the what.
It's possible. Yeah, okay.
It's the what. Is it possible that within the same budget, the diversity would change the mix, the allocation of resources, the kinds of initiatives that a company would promote? So you may not see increase in the spend,
Okay.
but
Okay.
you would see a major reallocation of efforts. That would enrich, if you have any way
Yes.
of capturing that, I think it would beef up the model.
It would. You're right. I'm not so sure we could capture it from KLD data, because KLD data has some categories that say innovative
Yeah,
giving.
I'm not familiar
innovative
at all
this, so
with
it's
the
not-
data.
But it doesn't tell you
the data
exactly what
sources.
they're giving the money to.
Yeah.
So that would have to be a more in-depth analysis.
Annual reports again.
Again, that's the thing. We keep getting triangle
There's no way
reports,
around
so,
it.
yeah. So we need to find somebody who is willing to do that. Bribe him or her. Or I don't know.
Some philanthropist who would give you
Yeah,
money to
exactly.
do this. Think about it.
I'm quite sure he or she would want to give the money somewhere else. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We're moving to our third.